Welcome to the Impact Multiplier CEO podcast. If you're a chief executive, or if you think like one, and you want to create exponentially greater impact, then this show is for you. My name is Richard Medcalf, founder of Xquadrant. I coach some of the most successful and impressive CEOs and executive teams on the planet and help them achieve extraordinary results. And no matter how successful you've been in the past, there's always a whole new level of impact available to you. So, if you're ready to play a bigger game than ever before, I invite you to join us and become an Impact Multiplier CEO. Today I'm speaking with Mark Makepeace. Mark is a fascinating individual with over 30 years of experience in the financial services industry, starting back in the 1980s with the London Stock Exchange, where he joined it to coordinate the Big Bang, the deregulation of the City of London. He then built FTSE Russell out, the Footsie, a real blue chip brand, starting from when it was just 9 people until the point when it was bought out for $1 billion. So a really fascinating story. He has a book, he has plenty of stories to tell, and how he was able to really win the support of very influential people is a critical lesson, I think, for all of us. And it's also great to hear his plans for the future. He's just taken a role as CEO of Wilshire, a global investment technology and advisory company, and has plans to multiply that business by 5 or 10x in the coming years. So a wealth of experience. I'm sure you'll learn a lot and find it an enjoyable conversation, just as I did. So sit back, relax, and welcome to Mark Makepeace. Hi, Mark.
Hi, Richard.
Thank you for joining me today. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Pleasure to be here.
So first of all, thank you for joining. I know it sounds like you've been making heroic trips around Europe in the last few days, from Italy to London, despite COVID. So congratulations on making all that happen.
Thank you. Travel is not easy these days, and getting entry back to the UK is quite a challenge with all the forms that we got here.
I can imagine. So, also, Mark, really happy to have you. You're the chief executive of Wilshire. You've had a really interesting, I think, career in finance. You've just brought out this a book. I'm sure you'll mention to us, but you've really got a wealth of experience, and I think you've been around the world a couple of times as well in the process. So before we dive into your success formulae and your success formula and really explore how you've had the impact that you've had, perhaps could you give us a minute or two of just who are you, who's the man behind the mask, and what's been your journey, right? Like what took you from your starts in life to the chief executive role?
Yeah, it's I think the background often leads into how you tackle some of these roles. I grew up in sort of East London, a very sort of working area. My first main job was in local government, working at Lambeth Council, Brixton during the riot years there. And I moved from Brixton, which wasn't an obvious move, into the city to help coordinate Big Bang and the changes in the City of London.
Right.
And after I'd helped coordinate those changes, of course, I was kicking my heels. And the exchange asked me to stay on. I helped them in a number of strategic projects, trying to evaluate how they should operate in a new technology world then. And I then started Footsie, which became a joint venture between the FT and London Stock Exchange. And it was a joint venture, but it was a startup, just 9 people. The expectations were not that high, but we were very successful. We grew Footsie from 9 people to something like 1,500 people. Wow. We grew it from revenue of less than $1 million to, when I stepped down at the beginning of 2019, to almost $1 billion with a pretty healthy margin. So it was a business we grew organically, but also through acquisitions. and we were able to acquire some fairly big businesses in the US and other parts of the world. So it was quite a journey over that time. And
it's a blue
hopefully
chip,
I
chip
learned
brand,
a lot.
right? It's
a blue chip brand.
Yeah.
We created a brand that exceeded our expectation.
Yeah, that's incredible. And so now, what's this gig with Wilshire? What's going on there? That's fairly new for you, right?
It's new, but having stepped down from Footsie and spent a little bit of time sitting in the garden, I knew that I wasn't ready to sort of take it easy. So I wanted to get back in, and luckily enough, I was able to, working with private equity, we found what we see as the first of companies in which we can build upon. And Wilshire, they're a very impressive company, a long history, but essentially they provide financial advice, analytics, and data, which supports some of the biggest institutional and retail investors in the US and increasingly around the world. So we saw that as a great start for growing a much bigger company. And we always start with huge ambitions. So our ambition is to grow a business that is 10, 20 times the size of what we acquire, and that's what we're setting out to do. But we're just 2 months in, but making very good progress. Yeah,
fantastic. So I love this this sense of what's the next thing. I think that when you're living a kind of I describe it as an exponential life. It's like when you look back, it looks horizontal. When you look forward, it looks vertical, and that's when you're playing an interesting game.
That's right. And I suppose when I wrote the book, I think that helped me in a way realize that I wasn't ready to slow down, because as I wrote the book and you look back and you think about the different journeys and decisions you made, and those that worked, those that didn't, and you put yourself back in those times when, as you say, you're looking up that mountain. And you're sort of thinking, what's the next camp I could get to? And how do I move from there? And when you start as the small guy and you take on the bigger guys, and then you become one of the big guys, that's quite a journey for the team itself. As individuals, you go through a huge journey. And I think as I looked at that, I just thought, I'd love to do that one more time. At least one more time.
Yeah, I love that. I love the idea as well. I often say to people who have had huge success in like one phase of their business career, I'm like, and some people, they're like, yeah, perhaps I go to the golf course now. And I'm like, well, and they'll say, well, perhaps I can do a bit of this, bit of that. And there's nothing wrong with that again. But I often say, well, you've got two options at this point. You can dabble, which is like fun, but probably you're dabbling mainly because you don't want to get burnt, like worn out, and have your relationships suffer the way they did perhaps in the first part of your career. But what if you could do the next thing in a sustainable way, a healthy way, and what would a 25-year vision look like, that's exponential from where you currently got to? What about if the next 10, 20 years of your life had more 10x more impact than the first 40 did, and that's kind of, again, a really interesting place. So I love this kind of sense that
I enjoyed every part of the journey, but I enjoyed some of the journey towards the end as well, because you're right, when you were young, and I started Footsie when I was young, I was sort of early 30s, and then it's all about energy, and you achieve things despite the obstacles that are there. I think as you go through that career and you learn, towards the end, actually, you're coaching others. You're trying to help them create a vision. You're trying to stretch people. But actually, if you're doing it right, it's the younger talent and the other talents you're finding within the company that are really driving you forward. So you take on a different role. So hopefully, that's what enables me to try doing it again.
Lovely. So if you were to kind of look back at that your career so far, what's your secret sauce? So what are the one, 2 or 3 factors that is like the unique Mark Makepeace combination, right? What do you bring that has worked for you?
Yeah, I think I always wanted to make a difference. And I think that does come from my childhood, and as I said, I grew up in east part of London, fairly sort of working area. I had a father who would question everything, and actually at the time I sort of disliked that, but actually that became a key sort of tool in my armory, if you think, because what I learned to do, you were constantly questioning until you could get it right, and you were trying to create that picture of what change looked like. And that was enormously powerful, because if you can create a picture of the change and you can be clear about the impact and the difference that change makes, you can then start to think through, all the challenges of getting there, and you can also think through the steps, and it's much easier to lead a team. If as a team you create that vision and you'll buy in. So part of it was that it was just, I had the ambition, and I had something where I wanted to be different. I wanted to disrupt. I wanted to create something that was better than, and I had a view as to what that was. I surrounded myself with people who had skills which, arrogantly, I might say, complement me, but were different from me. And I think together, we could refine some of my sort of rough sort of ideas and turn it into something which, the clients appreciated, and the clients became our sort of, if you like, champions in a way. They wanted us to succeed.
So how did you do that? How did you how did you hire people with those complementary skills? Because often people can hire in their own image, right? They can actually surround themselves with lookalikes.
Yeah.
So, what was your approach for?
Well, I don't think there were many people like me in the city, so that helped. But I think I set out with the purpose of getting somebody that was different. And I was very lucky in that some senior people took me under their sort of wing. And when I first got involved in indices, I needed, a figurehead to help me pull together some of the big firms in the city. And I talked to a number of people I've been working with, and they pointed me in the direction of someone called Donald Bryden, who at that time was heading Barclays Global Investors. He went on to become Sir Donald Bryden. Was chairman of the London Stock Exchange for a time, was chairman of Sage, he was deputy chief executive of Barclays Securities. So a number of big jobs he ran. And he helped me enormously. I mean, he helped me in terms of, as I started tackling some of the problems, he would help me by just giving me guidance or contacting people and encouraging as well. So there were people like Donald Bryan who helped me. He helped me establish Footsie itself, because when I tried setting up Footsie, there was resistance at the board level at the London Stock Exchange. He was an independent board member, and he spoke in favour of it, and that helped convince the board. So having those people, and it wasn't because he had any interest other than, I think, he thought that I was someone who was trying to do something that was worth achieving. And then there's a number of people like that in my career, senior people who have done that, and not through me asking, through them, going out of their way to do that, and that helped me enormously.
So it's great that idea of having those right people at the right time to pull you up, almost, right? That people are further ahead.
Yeah.
I mean, modesty aside, because you did it, right? Like, what do they see in you, right? How did you do that, right? I mean, it's not everybody that gets these very senior figures to champion them and put them onto a platform that allows them to create the impact that they then go on and have. So what do you think they did see in you?
I think they saw a purpose, and I think they saw someone who was genuine in trying to achieve something. And I think they believed I could have impact that would be positive in their eyes. So examples of that is, look, I created something called Footsie for Good, which I at the time thought was a great idea, which it was an idea that came from Roger Moore. I was doing some work helping UNICEF, and Roger was helping us raise funds for UNICEF. And we were in Switzerland, I think it was Geneva we were in, we'd hosted a dinner. And after the dinner, Roger and I were sitting at a table, everyone had left. He brought out a couple of cigars. We were smoking cigars, drinking the last of the brandy that was there. And he said to me, Mark, he said, look, this index game, he said, you should do more for UNICEF. He said, what you should do is create an index of the good companies. And, the money you earn from that, you should give to UNICEF. And it seems such a simple idea. Maybe it was the brandy at the time, but the idea of creating an index of good companies seemed, obvious. But I got together then a group of experts in sustainability, and we designed the criteria for judging what a good company could be. And we then tried to apply that to the UK. And we actually found at that time, because this was before sustainability was really a strong theme, there was only a handful of companies that met the criteria. So we didn't have enough companies to start the index. But undeterred, we thought, look, let's publish the criteria and tell people we are going to create this index. And that will help us, obtain enough companies, because enough companies should think that's something that we want to do. So we did that, and I published that. Roger Moore helped me publish it. We stood together on the steps of the stock exchange, and the FT took pictures of us and put it on their front page. So it created a great news story. But of course, it created also huge opposition. The CBI sent one of their deputy chairmen to see me to tell me that this was just a way of criticising companies, and they were not in favour. The London Stock Exchange chairman rang me to say that they thought that, why was I doing this? And had I thought this through properly? And at the time, so I came under a huge amount of criticism at the time. And it was probably because I had thought that it would receive that sort of reception. So at that time, I called up the editor of the FT, Richard Lambert, who went on to become head of the CBI. Actually, strangely enough, now, Richard Lambert. And Richard called me in and said, and I said, look, this is the problem I've got. I'm being attacked in all these ways. And Richard said, okay. And he called in the various Lex columnists and had them interview me. And they published a Lex article, which was, positive in some ways and slightly negative, but it was a fair representation of what we were trying to do. And it set it out as to say, look, people shouldn't, this is the future. People should be thinking about how companies have an impact on society.
Absolutely.
And we were able to go ahead. We got the companies, enough companies to create the index, and off we went. And it was a great success. But, without the support of some key people, it probably would never have got off the ground.
Yeah, no, I love that. I mean, that I often describe with my work, as people who listen to the podcast will know, is the intersection of strategy, leadership, and purpose. Yes. And I really believe that, like, when you are, you can't move others until you are moved yourself. Yes. And like that, your point there is that when you're actually a man with a mission, if you like, somebody with purpose, then, as you said, people can see that and go, actually, I want to be a part of that. I want to at least open the door for this kind of stuff to happen. But I think you're taking on a personal risk. And I think just because I grew up, I think the way I grew up, I was always willing to take on that personal risk. I think as you get older, you see the risks more and you learn to reduce the risks. But the personal risks, even with the right purpose, the personal risks are still there. I mean, on one occasion, I found myself in the courts of Shanghai. Right. And because, again, the purpose was right, we were the first into China in 2001. We had been very successful in mainland China. And at that time,
the Chinese regulators were very much split between the reformists and those who were looking to maintain status quo. And the reformists had encouraged me and Footsie to license a product for trading outside of China in Singapore. And in China, you never ask for permission. You just go and tell the authority. If the authority doesn't like it, they'll tell you. If they're okay with it, they just say thank you for informing us. And we had 6 or 7 meetings with all the senior groups, and we have been told thank you for informing us. We wish you the best of success. Thank you very much. So we were launching in Singapore. The morning we were due to launch, there was a change in views in China, and the Chinese turned around and said, "You must stop. You cannot go ahead." Now, at that time, we were fully committed, and we did go ahead. And as a result, I was taken through the courts of Shanghai, found guilty. We appealed. Was found guilty again, was told to pay a penalty of $25,000 US dollars, and they took no further action. So it is just carried on. It is today the most successful contract that trades on the Singapore Stock Exchange.
Hello, it's Richard here with a quick interlude. These conversations are all about upgrading how you think about creating impact. So here's a resource to help you do just that whilst staying fast and focused. The CEO's checklist for challenging times is a quick way to enhance your thinking and detect blind spots, even when things are moving incredibly fast and you're not sure what's going to happen next. You can get this powerful checklist of 17 world-class strategies by heading to xquadrant.com/go/challenging times checklist with a hyphen between each of those 3 last words. Now, back to the conversation. In a sense, I feel that, in a sense, often the thing we think though is risky ends up being the safest thing, because point yourself in the direction of growth and change and learning. And it might feel risky at the time. It's pretty volatile, right? But
it's volatile. Well, the biggest risks are, as you say, is the unknown risk. Risks which you can see, you can plan for, and therefore you can reduce the impact, or you at least consider the impact. So those risks you expect to manage. It's the unforeseen risk. It's something that happens that you hadn't expected. Those are the risks. They're the ones that are much harder to manage and much more dangerous.
Yeah, exactly. It reminds me a bit of Nicholas Taleb, his book, the Black Swan, and I think it's Black Swan I'm thinking of. I'm thinking of Anti-Fragile, actually. It's where he talks about the fact that we're so anti volatility that we try to create all these structures to flatten it all out. With the result is everything seems nice and stable until it goes through catastrophic failure.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So it's like the equivalent. The example he gives is like a freelancer versus an employee. The freelancer suffers like this kind of volatility.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, they're probably never going to lose all their clients at the same time.
Yeah.
They're going to be able to adapt to new market trends, be learning new skills. Whereas the corporate employee might have a totally predictable salary for a decade, and then suddenly lose their job and suddenly realize they have marketable skills, right? So it's this kind of difference between, do you want to play this game of volatility, or or do you actually kind of want to try to shield that but have this potential risk of it all going wrong?
And a lot of risk is also about perception, because look, things are changing in the world. Technology is shaping the world. And if you're not thinking about technology in a business sense, then you're taking on huge risk. And the sort of digital world that is coming, and because of COVID is here even quicker, means that the way we do business has changed and will continue to change dramatically. But the thing is, the business opportunities that are out there are also very significant. I've been talking to people about digital impact in the financial world, and I'm saying, look, it's not just about how we communicate with people, it's actually how we invest. There are digital forms of investment out there today, but in 5, 10, maximum 15 years, all investment will be in some form of digital world. And once you turn it digital, you can change the shape of that completely.
Yeah.
So this new world will throw up huge opportunity, but it is a huge risk if you do, because it's happening so fast. It's a huge risk if you don't focus on it and try and do something. And if you believe you can have that steady state, I think today you're misleading yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah. So what's so let's get back to this question of solving problems. You're talking about you mentioned earlier on this idea about visualizing outcomes and questioning. Just tell me a bit more about that. How do you kind of how does that show up in the businesses you've led? How do you use that as an approach?
I never after Big Bang, I was kicking my heels around the London Stock Exchange, and what they had me do is they had me work on a number of different projects they had. And initially, they had me work with consultants. So they bring in consultants from outside, a McKinsey's or one of the big firms. And it was just on such a range of different things. So they had no proper disaster recovery plans at the exchange at that time because everything had moved to technology. They had me work alongside one of the consultants. And really, they saw in me something I hadn't seen, which was that problem solving. And then how do you break down complex problems into a way in which can be understood by people? And can you get at really what's the key factors which are driving it? Can you understand that, break it down into elements and build it up in a way in which you can solve those problems? And just doing 5, 6 of these projects, working alongside other experts and partners of these firms, and then starting to do this on my own, actually taught me so much. It taught me, and the biggest lesson to me was you've got to create a vision of the end goal. What is it you're trying to achieve, and then what does it look like? And you really got to be able to describe it. And you mustn't just describe it vaguely. And you've got to describe it in enough detail. And then when you describe it in detail so you understand it, you then got to describe it in a way in which others can achieve it. So in other words, if you describe this problem in such a way that everyone thinks, yes, that's a problem, but how the hell do I solve that problem? That's no good. You've got to describe it in a way and help people understand how they can solve elements of it or get to that end goal. And I think that's, and because they made me go around this with different consultants, that taught me a huge amount in trying to do that. So I started to visualize what's the end picture, describe that, break it down, have people question it, work with me, and then work out how we solve it and think about steps as to how you can get there. And since then, you can't do that with all problems, because small problems you need to just solve and move on. But for the bigger, more complex problems, that became our way of working.
Yeah, I think this idea of visualization, it's so important. I often push my clients, because you're right, that often people come back with slightly vague, slightly theoretical, conceptual visions or goals. And I really say, imagine I'm walking around your offices with a video camera, or I'm flying the wall, or I've hacked your computer network. What am I going to find in the future? So I know that, what's the checklist that I can go around with and tick off to see whether this vision is real or not.
That's right.
And it has to be tangible. I say a vision is something that you see, right? It has to be.
It has to be tangible. I mean, it has to be relatable. It has to be relatable. But it's also, look, it's got to be big enough and have an impact. So when we were, when we had $1 million of revenue, it was no good saying we were going to double the revenue. It just wasn't a big enough impact. So, you had to always have a target where at first people were sort of thinking, how do we achieve that? Because if you can get them over that, then, if you don't have that as the first reaction, the target's not big enough, not impactful enough.
Yeah.
And don't always think in terms of money, because often, money will follow, and today you're no longer running businesses just to generate more profit. It's a multi-stakeholder world, and you have to think through all the stakeholders and how you're going to bring them along and what the impact you are going to have on those stakeholders. And it needs to be positive. Yeah,
absolutely. And as we talked before, impact is the name of the game. And this is what I'm, the word that is probably, if somebody cut me open with, like a stick of rock, I think that quest for impact, right, and for always thinking, how do I do more, is there. And I think it's, as you say, it's like money will follow.
That's right. And I saw that with Footsie. I saw that. I said, look, we need to, be the biggest in terms of assets that follow us, because that would have impact. So I started to do things like set standards for how you would bring sort of these developing countries into our indices, and particularly would have a size and scale. And that was tricky because you were dealing with governments. And that's where I started also dealing with China. And that took a long time. But the impact of bringing China, Saudi Arabia into our industry, it moved billions of dollars. And because it moved billions of dollars, then we became important. Because we became important and influential, more and more clients wanted to help us, and more clients wanted to be involved with us.
Let's go into the future for a bit now, Mark. You obviously you've had this great career up to now. You've just leaving Footsie a while back. You've written your book about the inside story of that journey, right?
Yes, Footsie, the inside story. Yes.
Yeah,
it's a good read. It's a good read.
Yeah, well, given by the quality of the stories you've been sharing in the last half hour, I think probably a lot of people will be very interested in getting the juicy gossip, which would be fun. So and now you're kind of going into this very new role at Wilshire, where you've kind of said, I want to have a times 10 times 20 or more impact on the kind of size of this company and where it goes. Here's my question: what are you going to have to do differently in this next phase than you have had to do in the past? How's your own success formula going to need to change a bit?
Yeah, I think it's the leadership style has to change. And every time you do something, you do have to look at it and look at yourself and say, are you up for the change? Because you can never do any project the way you did the last one, no matter how successful the last one was. So each one you've got to look at afresh, and you've got to look at yourself honestly, and you've got to, which is difficult, and you've then got to get yourself up for that. But I think leadership has changed. And I think leadership today is much more, I suppose I call it sort of followership. In other words, you're coaching and you're coaching in a way where you inspire and people follow you. Okay. And I think that followership is very, very important. And I'm lucky enough is that a number of people who've worked with me in the past, whether they were clients or former colleagues, have joined me on this venture. But we're excited by it. But I also look at the market and see some of the trends. And then there are, some of the trends out there, yes, there's some that have been around for a while, but some of them are speeded up. I think there are 4 trends which are really driving the financial markets. The first one is technology, and that is changing like never before. And that's very, very exciting. And embracing technology and embracing the way technology can change your relationship with the client is, I think, the most important change that is happening now. We all used to say technology will change. We're now saying technology is changing, and that excites me. And that is, yes, we're involved in technology, but it's new because of the pace and where we are. The second is private markets. Private markets are far bigger than the public markets. Public markets have been shrinking. The reason is money's cheap, and there's a lot of money there, and therefore funding for private, where these companies can grow very fast, makes it an exciting area to be. And investors and the retail as well as institutional want to invest more in that market. And I think Wilshire is well positioned to help that growth. The third is, and I think we're only at the very beginning of this, is climate change and ESG, where I talked briefly that businesses need to think about all stakeholders. It's not just about the environment. Social issues are becoming more and more important, and the governance has always been an area. So that's going to be an area which will become standard. It used to be an area where, you know, a small people used to sort of invest or was important to them. Now it's everybody, and I think that's important.
Let me just say something about that, actually, that point about those stakeholders. Matt, one of the things I often do when I work with like a leadership team, for example, is to kind of broaden their view about like who would like to be in this room right now, right? So often when teams work together, they often get very introverted and like inward looking, and they're like navel gazing about how we're working in our own team dynamics, which is one thing, it's important, but already like who are the other stakeholders? And often there's a layer you can think of, obviously, but then there's like, well, who else could or should be in this room, and who would like to be in this room? And you could say, well, let's personify the planet and put them in this room. It sounds weird to start with, but actually you go, well, but what is our relationship with that, with this, you know, the planet? And as often when you open up the field of vision, that's where you find the new insights, because as somebody said, you know, the quote, it's like to the madman is perfectly logical, but within a very small frame of reference. Like they think somebody's out, everyone's out to get them, because they're ignoring all the people who are like totally ignoring them and sitting on the bench in the park and having a picnic or whatever, right? And it's like sometimes, so everything's logical within your frame of vision. But if you actually open it up and think about a new frame of vision and broader set of stakeholders,
and it's hard to do that, because often, you know, people are open-minded, but there are sort of, you grow up and you have these biases that you're even not aware of, and you, as you say, you naturally tend to select or like or group with people who have similar views to yourself. So to try and teach people to do the opposite, you know, it is actually spend time with people who think completely differently to you, come from a completely different background, and actually it does work. And again, if I look back in my career, when I joined London Stock Exchange, I was helped enormously by a person called Mitford Slade, Patrick Mitford Slade, who was a partner of Cazenove, an ex-Guards and officer. And he was chairman of what was called Projects Committee, which was overseeing Big Bang. And he was the one who picked me out from a group and made me the secretary to do that. And we were completely different ends of the scale in every way. But there was something, he was open-minded enough to think that I had a skill set that would complement him. And it worked. And it taught me an enormous lesson, is that, look, you've got to put all of those biases and prejudices and all of that to one side, and you've got to try and find people who are different in lots of different ways.
So I think you had a fourth trend?
My fourth was China. And because China will, again, change things, not just politically, and it will change that, but there's a whole new way of doing business with China and in China. And whether or not we like it because China is different, we have to deal with that, because it will be an enormous market, both within China, but also the Chinese will be an enormous market for the rest of the world. So we've got to find a way where, you know, you can understand and work with and in China.
Yeah.
They're different.
Good point. It's a great
They're
point.
different. So all the talk about diversity means
that's the rubber
we
hits
should
the
be
road.
thinking about that. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hey, Mark, it's been fascinating talking to you. If people want to find out more about you or about Wilshire, how should they do that? How should they get in touch?
Yeah, they should just look at the Wilshire website, and they'll find us on there. Or if they're on LinkedIn, send me a message. Very happy to talk to people.
Perfect. Well, again, it's been fascinating. I've got, really interesting stories. Thank you for sharing some of that journey with us, and being so open as well about what the future holds in store in the sector as well.
No, thank you. Really enjoyed that. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Now let's talk about you. When you're in top leadership, when you're in the biggest role of your career, who supports you at a deep level as you lead others? Who helps you multiply your impact and get to the next level? If you're ready to learn more about our content, our coaching, and our community, then visit us at xquadrant.com.